The wind howled across the Wyoming plains like a wounded beast, its icy claws slicing through layers of wool and leather. Snow swirled in blinding sheets, erasing the world beyond a few paces. Elias McCrae pressed on, reins tight in one hand, the other resting near the colt on his hip. His horse, a chestnut mare named Harlow, snorted steam and picked her way along the ridge with wary hooves. He should have turned back an hour ago. No cattle in their right mind would stray this far in a storm like this, but something had pulled him, a sound, maybe, or a feeling, the same gut instinct that had kept him alive in Shiloh, Gettysburg, and the Black Hills. Now it led him deeper into the white silence. Then he heard it again, a cry. Not the howl of wind, not the shriek of an owl or wolf. This was human, faint, weak. A child. He reined in hard, scanning the blizzard. "Hello?" he called, voice nearly stolen by the gale. Another cry, closer this time. He dismounted, boots sinking into knee-deep snow, and trudged toward the sound. There, crumpled against a snow-laced bush, was a small figure. Dark hair, bare arms, a thin frame wrapped in rags. The child didn't move. Elias dropped to his knees, brushing frost from the boy's face, skin like burnished copper, cheeks sunken, lips cracked and blue. The child was barely breathing. "God Almighty," Elias muttered. "What in hell are you doing out here?" No answer, of course. The boy's eyes fluttered, then closed again. Elias hesitated. This wasn't just any child. He was native. Cheyenne, maybe. Lakota. Could be Arapaho. Out here, that distinction mattered. Settlers had been killed for less than harboring a tribal child, but he couldn't leave him. Not like this. Not to die under the snow. He stripped off his coat and wrapped the boy tightly, then lifted him into his arms. The child weighed less than a sack of feed. With effort, Elias climbed back onto Harlow, holding the boy against his chest. The ride home was brutal. Visibility was near zero, and more than once Harlow stumbled. But Elias whispered to her, spurred her on, keeping his body wrapped around the child to shield him from the wind. By the time the ranch came into view, Elias could barely feel his fingers. The boy hadn't stirred. Only the faint rise and fall of his chest gave hope. Inside the cabin, Elias moved fast. Fire. Blankets. Hot broth. He laid the boy near the hearth and worked his limbs, rubbing warmth back into lifeless flesh. Still no name, no words, just wide eyes, watching him like a caged fox, fear and exhaustion in every breath. But Elias had seen fear before, and this boy wasn't an enemy. He was a child, starving and frozen, abandoned in the snow. If stories of grit and unexpected heroism pull at your heart, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. The fire crackled low, casting flickering shadows across the log walls. Elias sat on a stool beside the hearth, eyes fixed on the boy, lying on a bed of furs near the flames. Steam rose gently from a tin bowl, the scent of rabbit stew filling the room. He dipped a spoon, blew on it, then gently pressed it to the child's lips. "Come on, boy, just a little," he murmured. The child flinched, then parted his lips slightly. The spoon disappeared, and the boy swallowed weakly. It wasn't much, but it was something. Elias leaned back with a sigh. He'd seen children broken before. War had a way of finding the smallest souls. But this boy, he was too young to have endured whatever had driven him into that storm. 7, maybe 8 years old, bones showing through skin, fingers blistered and raw. He sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind outside. The storm hadn't fully passed. Gusts still shook the shutters, but the worst was over. In the firelight, the boy's eyes opened, studying Elias without blinking. "You got a name?" Elias asked. No answer. "You speak English?" Still nothing, just those dark, wary eyes. Elias exhaled, rubbing his temples. His hands were still cold, even after an hour near the flames. He looked at the boy again, his features unmistakably Cheyenne, or close enough. That meant trouble, big trouble. He stood and crossed the room, grabbing a flask from a shelf. A few sips of whiskey warmed his chest. He stared out the window, though nothing could be seen beyond the frost. He remembered the last time he'd seen a native child. It was 3 winters ago, after a raid in Pine Bluff. A child with a bullet in his side, and no mother to cry over him. Elias had buried that boy himself. The boy in his cabin stirred and coughed, a dry, shallow sound. Elias returned, kneeling again beside him. "Safe here," he said slowly. "No harm." The boy's lips moved, barely a whisper. Elias leaned closer but caught only a breath. "Food," he said, pressing another spoonful to the boy's mouth. This time the boy opened willingly. Elias gave a tight nod. "Good." "That's good." As the fire warmed the cabin, Elias added more logs, then fetched another fur to cover the child. He moved with purpose, but unease gnawed at his gut. Bringing a native child into a settler's home was a gamble. Folks in town had long memories and short tempers, and if the boy belonged to a local band, Cheyenne Lakota, they'd want him back, and they wouldn't knock first. He sat again, revolver resting near his hand. Outside, the wind groaned like an omen. He had done the right thing, he was sure of it. But right and safe were 2 different things on the frontier. And tonight, he had a feeling the storm wasn't quite over. The wind had gone quiet by dawn. The air outside hung cold and brittle, but the storm had moved on, leaving behind a blanket of snow and an uneasy stillness. Elias rubbed sleep from his eyes and stoked the fire. The boy still slept, shallow breaths but warmer now, wrapped in pelts and bathed in firelight. Elias stood, joints stiff, and pulled on his boots. He stepped outside, snow crunching beneath his feet. The early light cut through grey skies, touching the white expanse with a dull gold glow. He made his way toward the barn to check on the horses. Harlow would need water, and he had to see if any livestock had wandered off in the storm. But as he neared the barn, he froze. There, spread across the clearing like ghosts out of the fog, were horses, at least a dozen. On them sat men, silent, unmoving, and armed. Spears, rifles, bows, faces painted, eyes locked on him. Elias's breath caught. He knew warriors when he saw them, and these weren't lost or wandering. They were waiting. He didn't reach for his gun, not yet. He raised both hands slowly and stepped forward. "Morning," he called, voice steady. No answer. A tall man guided his horse from the line. He wore a buffalo cloak, his face marked with red and black lines that cut across his cheekbones. A hawk feather rose from his braid. Elias recognized the authority in his posture before he spoke a word. The chief. The man dismounted, boots sinking into the snow. His eyes, dark as obsidian, fixed on Elias without blinking. "You took a child," the chief said in a low, calm voice. Elias didn't flinch. "I found him in the snow, half dead. You took him. I saved him." A flicker of tension moved through the line of warriors. Hands shifted on weapons. Horses snorted, but the chief raised a hand, and silence fell again. "He is my blood," he said. "My grandson." Elias swallowed. "Didn't know that. Found him near the creek yesterday. No tracks. No sign of camp." The chief nodded once. "He was fleeing. Raiders came. He ran." That explained the bruises, the frostbite, the silence in his eyes. "I didn't mean harm," Elias said. The chief studied him, then spoke softly. "Where is he?" "In my cabin, resting." A pause. "We will come." Elias's jaw tightened. "Let me bring him out." Another pause. The chief considered, then gave a nod. 1 hour. The warriors did not dismount. They waited, watching Elias as he turned and walked back to the house. The cold was sharper now, not from the weather, but from the weight of what came next. He had crossed a line, maybe saved a life, maybe invited death. Either way, the storm outside had passed, but something darker had arrived in its place. Inside the cabin, the warmth had faded. Not from the fire, but from the air. Elias stood at the door, heart thudding, watching the boy sleep. The time he'd bought was nearly gone. He crouched beside him, touched his shoulder gently. "Boy, wake up." The child stirred, blinking at him, then sat up slowly. Elias helped him into a fur cloak, then poured warm water into a tin cup. "They're outside," he said softly. "Your people. They're here for you. The boy looked toward the door. No fear this time, just a quiet acceptance. Together they stepped out. The warriors remained motionless, as if frozen into the landscape. The chief took one step forward. The boy walked toward him, then stopped halfway. His legs trembled, but he didn't fall. Elias moved beside him, standing like a sentinel. "I want to understand," Elias said, looking directly at the chief. "What happened to him? Why was he alone out there?" The chief's gaze flicked to the boy, then back to Elias. "A camp near Medicine Ridge. It was small, families. He was with his mother." "What happened?" The chief spoke slowly, as if shaping each word from iron. "3 men came, spoke your tongue, wore fur like trappers. Came bearing trade, then turned, fire, guns, screams." Elias's stomach turned. "Who were they?" "Not soldiers," the chief said. "Not war men, thieves, killers. They did not care whose blood spilled." The boy looked down. His lips tightened. "He escaped," the chief said. "Ran into the hills. My scouts followed tracks but lost them in the storm." Elias felt a pressure in his chest. "You think I'm one of them?" The chief didn't answer. He didn't have to. "I fought in Virginia," Elias said, "not proud of what I saw. But I don't kill women. I don't raid camps. That boy would be dead if I hadn't found him." The warriors shifted again, uncertain. The chief studied Elias's face for a long time. "Men lie," he said at last, "but not their eyes." Elias stepped forward. "I saw what war does to us. To you. I buried brothers. Watched blood soak into soil that didn't care whose name we cried. I'm done with killing." The boy looked up at Elias, then reached and took his hand. Small, cold fingers wrapped around rough knuckles. A murmur passed among the warriors. The chief's eyes narrowed, less in suspicion now, more in thought. "He will speak for himself when ready," the chief said. "Until then he stays. We will wait." Elias nodded. "One night. Let him rest. Let him heal. Then he'll tell us all." A moment passed. The chief looked to the sky, then nodded once. "One night." As the warriors turned and rode back to the tree line, Elias exhaled. The boy still clutched his hand. In the silence that followed, something fragile had been born. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of it. Night returned with a stillness that felt heavy, like the calm before a quake. The boy lay curled beneath a buffalo hide, his breaths deeper now, steadier. Elias sat near the fire, rifle resting across his knees, though no one had threatened him, yet. Outside, a shadow moved. One of the warriors had lit a small fire near the edge of the woods. They were keeping their distance, for now. Elias leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. Every part of him felt pulled taut. He'd dealt with outlaws, soldiers, even bounty hunters. But this was different. These men weren't driven by gold or revenge. They were family, and he was the stranger. The boy stirred. Elias opened his eyes. "You hungry?" he asked. The boy nodded slowly. Elias spooned some beans into a tin plate, added a strip of venison, and handed it over. The boy ate in silence, chewing slowly, methodically. When the plate was clean, he looked up. "You saved me," he said, his voice dry but steady. Elias blinked. It was the first time he'd heard the boy speak more than a whisper. "You remember what happened?" The boy nodded. "Men came, fire, screaming, my mother." His voice broke. Elias put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You don't have to say more." The boy wiped his eyes with his sleeve. "They wore fur, spoke like you, but they had no eyes, only knives." Elias frowned. "No eyes." The boy hesitated, then clarified. "Their eyes were cold, empty, not men." Shadows, Elias understood. Raiders, killers with no soul. He'd known men like that during the war. "You got a name?" he asked. The boy hesitated, then said, "Little Crow." Elias nodded. "I'm Elias." The boy studied him for a moment, then quietly, "Old Horse." "What?" "That's what I'll call you. You're strong." like the ones who carry the tribe through winter. Elias gave a dry chuckle. That's a new one. A knock, a single hard rap echoed at the door. Elias rose slowly and opened it. The chief stood alone, moonlight gleaming off his hair. "One night," he said. "It passes." Elias looked back at the boy, then returned his gaze to the chief. He remembered, told me what happened. The chief's eyes narrowed. "And?" "They weren't yours. They weren't mine either. But I aimed to find out who they were." The chief stepped inside, only far enough to see the boy. Little Crow met his gaze without flinching. The chief gave a nod. "He is strong." "I want to speak with him more," Elias said. "Hear everything. Then he'll decide what he wants. Just give me that." The chief paused, then replied, "Until sunrise." And with that he turned and vanished into the night. Elias closed the door, heart heavy but resolute. Tomorrow might bring judgment or worse, but tonight Little Crow had chosen to stay, and Elias had chosen to protect him, no matter the cost. The cabin was quiet except for the soft crackle of embers and the wind whispering against the shutters. Elias poured a cup of warm tea and handed it to Little Crow, who held it with both hands. His fingers were steadier now, his face clearer. There was strength in his posture, a coiled resilience sharpened by pain. "You said they wore fur," Elias prompted. "Trappers?" Little Crow nodded. "But not like traders. Smelled of whiskey. One had yellow teeth, another had a scar across his neck." Elias leaned in, listening closely. "They smiled when they shot," the boy continued. "Smiled when my uncle fell. My mother tried to shield me. They hit her, dragged her," his voice cracked. "You don't have to—" "I remember," Little Crow said, firmer now. "She screamed at me to run. I did. Into the woods. I ran until I couldn't feel my feet." Elias sat back, hands tightening around his own cup. They weren't soldiers, probably outlaws, maybe deserters. "Men who lost themselves." The boy looked up. "Why would they do that?" "Because some men ain't men, just wolves in skin." Little Crow stared into the fire. "I waited for the snow to stop. Thought I could find food. Thought maybe someone would help. You found me instead." The boy nodded. "I thought you would leave me, like the others." Elias didn't ask what others. He didn't need to. "I've done things I ain't proud of," he said quietly, "but leaving a child to die in the snow wasn't going to be one of them." Little Crow set his cup down. "They'll want me back. I know. But I don't want to go." Elias looked at him, surprised. "I want to learn your way too," the boy said. "Ride both trails." Elias's throat tightened. "That's not easy. You'll have to fight for your place." "Everywhere." "I'm not afraid." "You should be." Little Crow smiled faintly. "You are." Elias chuckled. "Damn right." They sat in silence for a long while. Then the boy asked, "You had family?" "I did." "What happened?" Elias stared into the flames. "The war happened. Took my brothers, took my land, left me with a saddle and a few regrets." The boy's eyes softened. "You kept going." "I had to." "Same as you." The room seemed warmer now, not from the fire, but from the space between them. Something had shifted. "Your people outside," Elias said. "They'll want you to return." "I'll speak to them. But I want to stay, at least for now." Elias nodded. "Then we'll speak together." The boy lay down again, curling beneath the hides. Elias returned to his chair, rifle resting beside him. For the first time since the storm began, he felt something that almost resembled peace. Not safety, not yet. But the beginning of a path neither of them had expected. And Elias knew now. He wasn't just protecting a boy. He was standing beside someone who had already chosen to survive. The morning broke cold and sharp, the sky clear for the first time in days. Frost clung to the eaves like crystal daggers. Elias stood outside, rifle slung across his back, watching as the warriors returned from the tree line in silence. Their faces were unreadable. Only Chief 10 Bears dismounted. Little Crow stood beside Elias, wrapped in a wool coat too large for him, but proud and upright. He didn't flinch as the warriors approached. One of them, younger than the rest, his face marked with red paint and fire in his eyes, stepped forward. "He stays with the white man?" the warrior asked, voice low but dangerous. "Even after his mother's blood?" 10 Bears didn't answer. Elias stepped between them. "The boy made his choice." The young warrior scowled. "He's a child. He doesn't know what he chooses. He knows pain." "He knows survival," Elias said. The warrior unsheathed a blade and pointed it at Elias. "Then let the white man fight for him." Elias didn't move. "You sure you want this?" "If he bleeds for the boy, we'll see if he speaks with truth." 10 Bears raised a hand but didn't stop the challenge. "Blood proves honor." Elias handed his rifle to Little Crow and stepped into the snow, cracking his neck. He hadn't fought like this in years. He didn't relish it, but something had to be settled. The two men circled. No words, just breath and movement. The young warrior lunged first, fast and sharp. Elias dodged, barely, then countered with a shove. They clashed again, steel flashing in the morning light. The knife sliced Elias's arm, warm blood soaking his sleeve. He growled, not from pain, but from memory. This was the past reaching for him again. The warrior came harder now, spinning low, blade arcing toward Elias's side. Elias caught his wrist mid-swing, twisted hard, and drove his knee into the young man's chest, sending him sprawling into the snow. Silence. The warrior gasped for breath, stunned. Elias stood over him, blade in hand. He could end it. He didn't. Instead, he threw the blade aside and stepped back. "That enough?" 10 Bears walked forward. The young warrior rose slowly, face burning with pride and shame. He gave a small nod, then backed away. 10 Bears looked at Elias. "You didn't kill him." "Didn't come here for death." The chief turned to the others. "He fights for the boy. He bleeds, but does not take. There is honor in that." Elias took back his rifle and placed a hand on Little Crow's shoulder. 10 Bears gave a slow nod. "You both have earned one more day." Elias exhaled. It wasn't victory. It wasn't peace. But it was something neither of them had expected to find in this broken land. Respect. The sun hung low when Elias saddled his mare again, rifle strapped tight, eyes sharp. 10 Bears approached, mounted on a dark stallion, his face set in grim purpose. Behind him, warriors moved in quiet precision. Little Crow stood nearby, arms crossed, watching them prepare. "You're sure about this?" Elias asked the chief. 10 Bears gave a single nod. "Smoke from the east, a burned trail. The ones who took the boy's mother left marks. We follow." Elias looked to Little Crow. The boy's expression was clear. He needed this, not for vengeance, but for truth. "I ride with you," Elias said. 10 Bears studied him for a long moment, then gestured to an open horse. "Then ride." The trail led them through frozen pines and across shallow creeks glazed with ice. Tracks were faint, but Elias saw them. Boot prints, broken brush, ashes from an old fire. He knew outlaw signs. These men hadn't tried to hide. That was their mistake. As dusk fell, they came to a rise overlooking a narrow valley. Below, half-collapsed canvas tents fluttered in the breeze. Ashes marked the fire pit. Bones of livestock scattered like forgotten trophies. 10 Bears dismounted and knelt beside a charred log. They were here, days ago. Elias crouched beside him. "I know this smell." "Bacon rotgut powder, it's them." Little Crow stepped forward, silent. He knelt and picked up a strand of torn fabric, red and beaded. "She wore this," he whispered. Elias placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "This is where she died," the chief said. But they moved fast. They knew they left one alive. "They'll move again," Elias said, "but not far." Outlaws like these always return to the same well. The warriors fanned out, searching. One returned with news, fresh tracks near a ridge, wagon wheels, 4 men, maybe 5, headed west. "We can catch them," Elias said, "before they vanish again." 10 Bears gave a nod. "Then we ride at first light." That night, around the fire, silence ruled. No songs, no stories. Only the crackling of wood and the sound of wind through trees. Elias sat beside Little Crow, who stared into the flames. "Tomorrow you might see them," Elias said. "The ones who did it." "I won't run," the boy replied. "I know." "You're not like them," Little Crow added. "You don't smile when you hurt people." Elias looked away. "There was a time I didn't know the difference." The boy leaned closer. "But now you do." The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. 10 bears sat across from them, quiet but watchful. Elias felt the weight of what they were walking toward. This wasn't justice by a court. This was the old kind, the kind forged in smoke and blood. He wrapped his blanket tighter and closed his eyes. Tomorrow they would find the men who broke the boy's world, and Elias knew he would do more than just ride beside them. He would stand for what remained. The valley was narrow, walled by jagged cliffs and pine shadows. Snow clung to the rocks like dust on old bones. By midday they spotted them, 4 riders and a wagon half covered in canvas, just as the tracks had foretold. The Red Pike Riders, known by name to no one but known by what they left behind. Ash and blood. Elias crouched beside 10 bears on a ridge above the camp. Below, the men were laughing, drinking from tin flasks, one of them tossing firewood into a small blaze. No guards posted, no urgency. They didn't expect company. "That's them," Little Crow whispered, eyes locked on the scene. 10 bears nodded. "We move on your signal." Elias's jaw clenched. "We take them alive if we can." 10 bears gave no answer. His silence spoke volumes. They descended like ghosts, silent, swift. Arrows flew first. One outlaw dropped, a shaft through his shoulder before he could rise. Another reached for his rifle but met a bullet instead. The third stumbled back into the wagon, firing blindly. The last tried to mount and flee, but Elias was faster. One shot shattered the air and the horse bucked, throwing the man to the frozen earth. Chaos was brief. When the dust settled, 3 outlaws lay wounded, 1 dead. Elias approached the man he'd shot, now groaning in the snow, blood soaking his coat. Scar on his neck, yellow teeth bared in pain. "Now you remember a Cheyenne camp near Medicine Ridge?" Elias growled. The man spat blood. "They had silver, furs. Elias grabbed him by the collar. "You butchered families. You think this land forgets?" The man sneered. "They weren't people, just savages." That word turned the wind colder. 10 bears stepped forward. "You will not speak again." With a nod, 2 warriors dragged the man away. Little Crow stood over the body of the man who had first fired, eyes fixed. Elias approached him slowly. "He was laughing," the boy said. "Before, when they came." "You don't need to carry this," Elias said. "I already do." Elias knelt beside him. "Then let's carry it together." The surviving outlaws were bound, their weapons taken. One of the warriors, a young man named Spotted Elk, had been shot through the thigh. He gritted his teeth, refusing to cry out. Elias helped bind the wound. "You'll live." Spotted Elk nodded. "They won't." That night, the fire burned hotter than before. Not for warmth, but to mark something deeper. A line crossed, a wrong confronted, a scar touched by firelight. Elias sat near Little Crow, watching the stars blink into the sky. "We stopped them." The boy didn't speak for a moment. Then, quietly, "She can rest now." Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. There was no celebration, only silence. But it was the kind that followed not just vengeance, it followed justice. The ride back was quiet, no songs, no war cries. Just the sound of hooves breaking through snow and breath rising in soft plumes. The Red Pike Riders were gone, buried beneath stone and frost, and their silence echoed louder than any words could. Elias led the way, Little Crow riding beside him, his spine straight, his face unreadable. Behind them, 10 bears and his warriors followed, a quiet column of survivors, not victors. At the edge of the valley where prairie met pine, they stopped. The sun hovered low, casting long shadows over the land. 10 bears dismounted first. "You kept your word," he said to Elias, "and you bled with us. That means something." Elias nodded, uncertain how to answer. "You have no tribe," the chief continued, "no home but your horse. If you ever seek a place, there is one among us." Elias looked at Little Crow. "What about him?" 10 Bears turned to the boy. "The trail is yours. You've seen death, chosen life. You may ride with us or stay with him." Little Crow didn't hesitate. "I stay." 10 Bears studied him, then stepped forward and pressed a hand to the boy's chest. "Then walk both paths. Be bridge and flame." To Elias he offered a firm grip, warrior to warrior. "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you," Elias replied. With that, the warriors turned and rode east, disappearing between the trees. Elias and Little Crow stood alone, the silence wrapping around them like a new kind of storm, one without wind or threat, just the weight of decision. They rode slowly back to the ranch. The cabin looked smaller now, the snow around it untouched, as if it had been waiting. Inside, Elias stoked the fire. Little Crow hung his mother's beads on the wall just above the hearth. That night they shared venison and beans. No prayers, no speeches. Just warmth and the knowledge that both had crossed something larger than distance. Later, by the fire, Elias glanced at the boy. "You sure about this? Life out here's hard. You'll learn things most kids never should." Little Crow met his gaze. "I already have." Elias chuckled. "Fair enough." He poured 2 cups of hot tea, handed one over. "Then here's to whatever comes next." They clinked the cups softly, a quiet toast between unlikely kin. As flames danced against the log walls, Elias knew peace had never been a place. It was a moment, a breath, shared between people who had earned it the hard way. Not by blood, not by vengeance, but by standing firm when it mattered most. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more unforgettable tales of honor and humanity. And don't stop now. Click the next video on your screen to ride into another story of courage and connection.